Good morning and welcome to this panel on COVID. We're calling it Keeping Your Guard Up, COVID-19 and Westminsters Strategy. We have four panelists. We have Guy Bush, PhD, who's a retired biology professor and researcher in evolutionary biology. We have Dr. Fred Hansen, MD, who practiced obstetrics and gynecology in Austin. And we have Dr. Don Wukash, MD, who practiced and taught cardiothoracic surgery in Houston. And I'm William Sluice, MD. I taught and practiced psychiatry and psychoanalysis in Houston and later Austin. We're now into our lockdown, 18 weeks worth due to the COVID pandemic. Thus far here at Westminster, we've had only 5 resident cases, 3 in the last weeks of March, none for 3 whole months, and 2 this month. At least 2 of the resident cases, and very likely others, were almost certainly acquired off campus. We've had twice that number of cases among our staff. Not surprising since our associates are in the larger Austin community every day. But with the protocols in place, this has not led to community spread within the Westminster campus. And fortunately, none of the cases, resident or staff, has required hospitalization. So if everything's going reasonably well, why are we having this panel now? Well, one obvious reason is the current very large surge of cases in Austin and Travis County and Texas, which means there's even greater risk of exposure. Also, as time passes with things going rather well, let's face it, we tend to become more complacent and less vigilant. It's only human nature when things seem okay here, but it can lead us to become careless, to drop our guard. But the danger is as real as ever, more so with the current surge. And we've all seen carelessness about observation of the precautions in conversational gatherings in the bistro, the Laurel, the game room, and in the lobbies and courtyards. This carelessness very seriously undermines our protection from this very contagious, life-threatening virus. We hope and believe that taking this time to think about COVID and to gain a clear understanding of how Westminster's strategy works will make all of us better at sticking with the program and keeping our guard up. Now, Dr. Bush will tell us something about the biology of the COVID virus. Guy?
Thank you, Bill. I've been asked to cover some of the biological facts about the COVID-19 virus, which is something we are all concerned with. The COVID-19 pandemic is still in its first wave in America, and new infections are rapidly expanding. I'm going to put a slide on here, hopefully, well, it's somehow not working, so I'm going to stop this. Actually, the slide I wanted to put on was a slide showing the progression of this disease in America. It took 100 days for the first 1 million COVID cases to develop, 43 days for the second million, 27 days for the third million, and only 16 days for the fourth million, and that occurred only a few days ago. At this rate, it will not take long for another million individuals to become infected, and many of those people will die. Today, the only way to stop that progression is through isolation, one way or the other. So what is the virus anyway? The virus is the ultimate parasite, capable of reproducing only inside the cell of a living organism, inside your living cells. They're the smallest and simplest of all organisms, so small that 500 million cold viruses can rest on the head of a pin. For this reason, they are easily dispersed as we breathe in tiny droplets. and these tiny droplets can remain suspended in the air and infectious for some time. They are the prime way the COVID virus is dispersed and infects those not wearing masks and safely distance themselves from others. Viruses are composed of only a very few genes enclosed in a protective protein coat, and many such of these COVID viruses are covered by a spiky, fatty envelope. These spikes, which appear as a crown in the so-called coronavirus, are genetically keyed to latch into the host cell's surface. Once detached, the virus penetrates and takes over the biological machinery of the host cell, where it replicates itself many, many times. The newly formed viruses then emerge from a dying host cell to infect other host cells in your body. In humans, this usually occurs in the lungs, sometimes causing severe respiratory problems, although other areas of the body are often affected. COVID-19 virus is new to humans. So where did it come from? There are many kinds of viruses that infect everything from bacteria to protozoans, fungi, plants, and animals. COVID-19 belongs to a family of some 60 known coronaviruses infecting mammals and birds. Some cause only mild or no symptoms at all, such as a common cold in humans. That's a coronavirus. Some of them are coronaviruses. Other coronaviruses can produce severe respiratory diseases and other problems. Many of our human bacterial viral diseases originated from other animals, particularly those closely associated with humans on farms or which serve as food, such as pigs, cows, camels, chickens, and ducks. In the case of COVID-19, genetic studies have established that it originated in bats after first passing through an unknown mammal in southern China. Two other highly lethal coronaviruses, such as Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, known as MERS, which jumped from bats to camels to humans in Saudi Arabia in 2012, and severe acute respiratory syndromes, known as SARS, that moved from us from bats through small animals in southern China in 2002. Luckily, neither of these lethal coronaviruses spread to the rest of the world. So far, COVID-19 is the only one that managed to erupt in a pandemic. I should say a few words about flu and the COVID-19 virus. The coronavirus and flu viruses are not closely related, although flu and COVID-19 produce a range of similar respiratory symptoms. COVID-19 more often leads to pneumonia and death. That's all my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Guy. Now, Dr. Don Wukash will tell us more about the disease caused by the COVID virus. Don?
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Good morning. My role on this panel is to hopefully convince you of the seriousness of the disease and to support the things that we can all do, specifically wearing a mask above the nose, social distancing, frequent hand washing, and not touching your face. Respiratory transmission is the most common mode of spread, but the membranes of your eyes, nose, and mouth are also possible entry points, which is the reason not to touch your eyes. This is a bad disease and you do not want to get it. While about a third of the people infected with COVID don't have symptoms, a significant proportion become quite ill. Some die. Last week in Texas, there were 1,020 deaths. In the US alone, 150,000 people have died. This is 3 times more than all the deaths of the 58,000 U.S. military soldiers who died in Vietnam. The basic problem of the disease is that it is a disease of increased blood clotting in the blood vessels all through the body. It's a systemic disease, meaning that everywhere blood flows in every organ. So it's not just a disease of the lungs, but multi-system disease. When blood clots, it becomes scar tissue. Just like if you get a cut on your arm, you'll get a scar. That's a fibrous tissue. The lungs, heart muscle, liver, kidneys, nervous system, skin are all replaced in COVID with scar tissue. Another problem that's just emerged in England right now, that a significant number of patients, even those who have mild symptoms not requiring hospitalization, are showing after effects after they recover. Shortness of breath, short-term memory loss, brain fog, poor concentration, chronic fatigue, muscle pain, headache, poor exercise tolerance. The mortality rate for all ages is 3.6% approximately. This increases with age, and for those of us over 80 who get the virus, 1 out of 7 of us will die, 14.23%. In conclusion, I fervently encourage all of you to religiously do these things that we must do in this pandemic if we're going to stop it. Frequent hand washing, no touching your eyes, nose, or mouth. Although social distancing of 6 feet is a standard recommendation, because without a mask, droplets can travel or do travel more than 8 feet, 10 feet. So therefore, a safer distance for social distancing is probably closer to 10 feet than it is 6. Wearing a face mask, the most important thing that I will say today is to repeat the request of Chuck Borst, which he wrote in his newsletter, Questions and Answers, on July 23rd, last week. However, unfortunately, many of us either did not read it, hopefully, we just did not understand it, or in the worst case, blatantly or ignoring Chuck's vital request. And this is, Chuck wrote, quote, small group gatherings should be done with masks at all times. Eating together is not allowed at this time. This is an unsafe practice. You need to eat alone or with those living in your household. Obviously, this also means drinking. Drinking coffee together is not allowed because you can't drink with your mask on. Unfortunately, there's still a number of us doing this. 3 final thoughts and I'll conclude. All of us who have lived long enough and are lucky enough to live in a safe place like the Westminster have had to give up some social behaviors that we enjoyed. One safe and innocuous activity that most of us have enjoyed in our old age has been sitting with friends, talking, drinking coffee. Safe until now, but not during the virus pandemic. Because one cannot drink coffee with a mask on, the reality of the situation is that for a while at least, we need to drink our coffee in an apartment before we come to gatherings. It is not masks or social distancing. We must do both. Remember, the life you save may be that of your best friend or may be your own. Thanks.
Thank you, Don. Next, Dr. Fred Hansen will speak about the treatment of COVID disease and particularly about its impact on the healthcare system. Fred?
Thank you, Dr. Sluice. The current situation in the United States about COVID is very serious. Because COVID is a highly contagious disease with a significant number of deaths and continuing disabilities, COVID is many times more deadly than the common flu. In 27 states, the number of daily deaths is still rising, and hospital resources are being maxed out. Hospitals in Florida, Arizona, and California are experiencing overcapacity and shortages of equipment, medications, and personnel. In Texas, Houston, San Antonio, and Austin are near hospital capacity. Austin even has a plan to use the convention center for overflow COVID patients. Counties in South Texas are being overwhelmed and are transferring their cases as far away as Amarillo. The United States deaths are already in excess of 150,000 and increasing at a rate of 900 to 1,000 deaths a day. Deaths in Texas have tripled in the past 3 weeks. A week ago, President Trump admitted that it was only going to get worse. Although we have had 4.3 million cases in the United States, there are still over 300 million Americans that have not become ill. So this virus has a great number of potential victims to draw from. On a local basis, a nursing home in nearby Round Rock has had 81 positive COVID tests. COVID testing supplies are limited, causing results to be delayed by as much as 2 weeks. Results that are delayed that long are useless. Some antiviral drugs and some anti-inflammatory drugs have had partial success in treatment of COVID in seriously ill people, but supplies of these drugs are limited. As we age, our immune systems are greatly reduced. We become more susceptible to infections. Death rates in our age group from COVID are between 15 and 20% of those infected. This is important because Westminster has already had 7 associates and 4 or 5 residents infected with COVID as of the figures of last week. So the virus has already entered our premises and will do so again. Not everything is bad, however. 100 companies worldwide are working on being able to produce a vaccine. This week, human testing of several vaccines has begun around the world. However, it is not reasonable to think that any vaccine will be available to us until the first quarter of 2021. I will close by saying that it is essential that everybody get a vaccination against flu in September or October to avoid the possibility of catching both flu and COVID at the same time, which would clearly be disastrous. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. With all that information as background, let's talk a little bit about Westminster's strategy and the precautions we have in place with the goal of protecting us from the COVID illness. Westminster's strategy involves 2 major elements. Each one of these elements requires our active participation in order for them to be most effective. First of all, the first element involves measures to reduce the chances for introduction of the COVID virus into the community. This won't be 100% effective, as we've already seen, but it will keep introduction to a minimum. The second element involves measures to limit the spread of whatever COVID infection gets into the community. And here's the biggie: to prevent community spread within the Westminster campus. That's the real key. The first element, limiting chances for introduction to COVID, involves limiting visiting avoiding any but really necessary trips off campus, screening everyone entering the campus, quarantining any who have been off campus overnight or have been in the hospital or have been knowingly exposed, and maintaining incentives for our associates to report their own symptoms or contacts. And I think that's a key point. And if they know they're not going to lose their job, they're much more likely to be ready to stick with the program and report their symptoms. As you can see, some of these measures absolutely require our following the protocol as well. The second element of the strategy, preventing or limiting the spread of any COVID that gets in, depends on our following precautions. First and foremost, have we mentioned masks? Masks are probably the most important single element of the things that we need to do. Wearing masks at all times and wearing them properly when out of our apartments and when others are in our apartment, like housekeeping. Maintaining social distance, 6 feet or more, and frequent hand washing. This is also why we avoid large gatherings, presently no more than 10, with precautions, and the frequent sanitizing of door handles, rails, and other contact surfaces by our staff. Why is all this important? Particularly, why is our mask wearing and distancing and limiting size of gatherings important? Because at least a third of people who have infections don't realize it, at least for a time. Some never do. And at least a third, probably a bit more, of the infection transmission occurs from people who don't realize they're infected. So we must all know that we could be infectious and not realize it, even if we're feeling just fine. And we have to act accordingly to avoid endangering others. This kind of strategy has been very effective in healthcare settings with the AIDS virus, called universal precautions. AIDS virus is a little easier to avoid transmission because it involves bodily fluids. And here we're dealing with talking and sneezing and just talking and having our mouth open. But if we do all the things that we've mentioned, we protect the community and ourselves. These precautions are reinforced by Westminster's segmenting staff service to residents as much as possible to avoid widespread transmission within the community should one person be infected. To recap, the precautions that depend on our participation are wearing masks properly, covering the nose and mouth, no pulling them down to rub your nose or drink coffee or whatever, maintaining social distancing. And an important point, it's not masks or distancing, it's both. There's been some confusion with this in the media for the general public, but we really need to do both at the same time. And also very important, avoiding all unnecessary trips off campus. Yeah, there's some things that it's easier to run out and get, but that's not a good idea. And of course, frequent hand washing is important. And remember, combining a number of measures, each one of which may be imperfect, can add up to very effective protection, and I think we've seen that. And also, please remember that these precautions are not a political matter. They're a public health matter, and they're for our protection. It's clear we're in one of the best places possible to be in during this pandemic. Let's all do our part to keep it that way by maintaining our vigilance and remembering that it's up to each one of us to stick with the program. Thanks for helping to keep Westminster safe, and thanks for your attention to this panel. Good morning.